Since I guess kind of been studying for this one, I've spent a great deal of time well, let me just start this way. With each text, with each story, with each interaction that Christ has, one of the ways that I was taught I was basically taught throughout from all of my mentors that you just enter into the text and you try to find your place within the story. And as you find your place within the story, within the text that you're talking about, within the context of everything that is going on, you're able to find, in some ways, some sort of relationship to Christ and what's taking place here. I'll be brutally honest with you, this week has been absolutely difficult with this one. Because this morning we're going to look at Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. And this whole conversation of what is going on with Christ, with the context of what's going on with His disciples, and this whole grand plan, grand story that is unfolding before our eyes. Before we get there, though, there's a tension that lies here. Because the tension that lies is between the humanity of Jesus and the divinity of Jesus. As Christ, as God in the flesh, He is 100% man, and as God in the flesh, He is 100% God. And so you navigate through this context, you navigate through this story, and you're trying to figure out, well, which one is which, and how's this taking place, and how much, in my literal analytical mind, I'm going, so what percentage of Jesus' divinity is at work here, and what percentage of His humanity is at work here, and how are we getting what's taking place? I have no idea. But Hebrews gives us a little bit of an insight here into Jesus Himself, and before we get to the Mark text, I just want to read this one for you to kind of give you a little bit of picture into Christ, Jesus, this God in the flesh, this man, 100% human, who's here. Hebrews tells us in chapter 5, it says, in the days of His flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to the one who was able to save Him from death. And He was heard because of His reverent submission. Although He was a son, He learned obedience through what He suffered. And having been made perfect, He became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey Him, having been designated by God a high priest according to the order of Melchizedek. If I'm not mistaken, the writer of Hebrews is talking about Jesus learning something, as though He didn't know it beforehand. You would think that this God in the flesh wouldn't really need to do that. But He's learning obedience. Jesus is learning obedience through His suffering. And not just that, He's offering up the same types of prayers that many of us do. These petitions in tears. These supplications asking God, please save me from what I'm in the midst of. And He was heard by God because of His reverent submission. Now flip over to Mark chapter 14 if you've got your Bibles with you. And a little bit up here behind me here in a second. Mark chapter 14. We're going to begin in verse 32. It's an interesting text. This is Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. He has already instituted the Lord's Supper, which we talked about last week. He has also already told all of the disciples, you will all leave me, you will all scatter, you will all run away. Peter jumps up and says, oh, not me, Lord. And He says, oh, by the way, you're going to deny me in front of everybody. Beginning in verse 32, they went to a place called Gethsemane, and He said to His disciples, sit here while I pray. He took with him Peter and James and John and began to be distressed and agitated. And he said to them, I am deeply grieved even to the point of death. Remain here and keep awake. And going a little further, he threw himself on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. He said, Abba, Father, for you all things are possible. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I want, but what you want. He came and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, Simon, are you asleep? Could you not keep awake 1 hour? Keep awake and pray that you may not come into a time of temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. And again he went away and prayed, saying the same words. And once more he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were very heavy, and they did not know what to say to him. He came a third time and said to them, Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? Enough! The hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand. Immediately, while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived, and with him there was a crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, The one I will kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard. So when he came, he went up to him at once and said, Rabbi, and kissed him. Then they laid hands on him and arrested him. But one of those who stood near drew his sword and struck the slave of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Then Jesus said to them, Have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me as though I were a bandit? Day after day I was with you in the temple teaching, and you did not arrest me, but let the scriptures be fulfilled. All of them deserted him and fled. A certain young man was following him, wearing nothing but a linen cloth. They caught hold of him, but he left the linen cloth and ran away naked. Look at this text. Let me start here before we work our way through this. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where the enormity of the situation you just kind of found yourself lost in? What I mean by that is not that you recognized the weight of the situation necessarily, but just that this huge situation is going on and you have no idea how big of a situation you're actually involved in. Thought that several different times as I've been in ministry. I remember getting a phone call. It was probably, 8:30 at night on a Sunday evening. It was a phone call from a teenager who was 17 years old, and she said, first thing out of her mouth, Josh, she has a gun. And then there was this silence. And I remember thinking to myself going, I didn't know who it was. I recognized the voice, but I couldn't put a name necessarily together. Couldn't put a face to the voice. And yet, you answer a phone and somebody says she's got a gun, and you're like, whoa, what's going on here? And the response was, she's got a gun. She told me the name of this teenager, and she said she's at home in her room right now, and she has a gun. And I said, what's going on? I said, well, tonight, she plans on killing herself. And I said, you're sure she's at home? She said, yep, in there right now. Immediately got off the phone, called her parents, and I said, you got to get in the door right now. Where is she at? And they said, well, she's been in her room for the last couple hours. And I said, does she have anything with her? And they said, well, we don't know. Why? You're starting to scare us. And I said, because I'm scared. You need to get in the room right now. I get there probably 10 minutes later. Her parents are standing at the door, and the daughter, this other 17-year-old girl, she is on the bed, and she is clutching a shotgun. And her parents are in tears, but she won't give up the gun. She's made them think that it's loaded. And so she's sitting there with a shotgun pointed up at her head. Door was wide open. I just went running in. We get into the room. I get into the room, and I see this situation unfolding. And really over the next probably, and I honestly don't know, it felt like 30 minutes, maybe an hour, it seemed like. It was trying to calm her down so that she would give up the gun. and trying to explain to a 17-year-old girl who is emotionally a wreck, do you understand the enormity of the situation? I know life is hard and I know you're upset, but do you understand the consequences of what your actions could be in the next few moments? No idea. After a great deal of conversation, a great deal of begging, she finally handed us the gun. I've had a couple different situations like that in my life. Trying to explain to a teenage boy why sex with his girlfriend was not a good idea. Understand the enormity of the situation. Understand the consequences from here on out for the rest of your life. You look at a situation here, and it is obvious that the disciples have no idea the enormity of the situation. To see Jesus the Christ, He's supposed to be Messiah. He's God's chosen one, and the man walks off and throws himself on the ground because he's so distressed and so agitated, and he's grieving to such a degree. Luke says that he was so upset and so weak that his sweat as he prayed was like drops of blood. That the situation was in such dire need that God sent an angel to strengthen him. Because Jesus the Christ was begging God, do not make me fulfill this plan. Please let me do something else. I'm begging you. Let me do something else. Don't make me die. If there's anything else, if there's any other way, please let it happen. Anything. And he doesn't just say the prayer once. Did you hear it? 3 times. 3 times he goes off to pray, and 3 times he comes back to see his disciples who are asleep, and they have no idea how big this moment is. They have no idea how big this moment is. Because the man who's supposed to be the Christ, the Messiah, to bring salvation and redemption to the world is asking God, I don't want to do this. Please let me do something else. Did you hear the text in Hebrews, though? Because of his reverent submission, God heard his prayer. And in the Garden of Gethsemane, God says no. No. So he sends an angel to strengthen him. And in maybe the weakest moment, we get a picture of Jesus the Christ, Jesus, man, says, okay, God, I'll do it. I'll do it your way. We'll do it. It's almost like, and I don't know if you've ever found yourself in this situation. We hadn't seen this picture of Jesus yet in the story of Mark. We hadn't seen this yet. And it's almost like ministry and the conversation of life and all the things he was trying to do for the kingdom, it was just so busy. In Mark, it's very immediately. We even get an immediately in this text. Over and over, you see this, he's running to the next scene, almost. And it's almost like the gravity has finally hit him as a man. And he's begging God no. And 3 times, he doesn't just beg out of the situation. 3 times he says, not what I want, but what you want. Only to come back and find his closest 3 asleep. Enough sleeping. Get up. Here it is. And here comes Judas. And they bring in their weapons. Do you know what's interesting? I don't know if you noticed this as we worked our way through the text. He talks about being with his disciples early on in the text, and after that, he never recognizes anybody else with him as disciples. They aren't acting like disciples. They've fallen asleep. Not just have they fallen asleep, Christ, who is going to redeem the world through non-violence, through taking on violence. One of those standing nearest to him, who in one of the other Gospels shows us that it's Peter, but Mark doesn't even name him, pulls out a sword to begin the revolt. And Jesus is like, that's not what I'm about. No. And when the situation is over, when he's been arrested and they've taken him, it says all of them, again, no recognition of who they are, all of them deserted, fled. Even going so far as to show us some random insight about a young man who's wearing nothing but a linen cloth, who when they grab him, fights his way out of his clothes to run off naked. Almost like, or at least bringing up the idea of maybe Adam and Eve running from the presence of the Lord, hiding in fear and in shame. Not recognizing the gravity of the situation. I don't know what to do with this text. Because I don't know if you're like me, but I don't like seeing my Jesus weak. And there's even a part of me that wants to go ahead and kind of rationalize it as, oh, well, he's doing this to show the disciples what a big deal this is. I can't see that. This isn't a show. This is Jesus, human, recognizing the gravity of sin and death, destruction, and knowing what's coming his way. But here's the interesting thing in the entire text here. The player in the story that I think maybe deserves a little more reflection is God the Father here. As the father of a couple little ones, I go running when they fall. I go running when they cry. I go running when they're hurting. Don't even think about it. Interestingly enough, and she's not in here, so I'll talk about her, Heather. Since we've had children, she's now become the heavy sleeper and I'm the light sleeper. And the minute Harper's bedroom door opens, I hear it every night. Because she joins our bed about 5:30 every morning with 52 baby dolls and pillows. Spend the rest of the night throwing them off. And then she proceeds to lay sideways in a bed that, Or, the moment I hear Holden stirring, I hear him. And I'm up, checking on him. And here is the father, hearing his son, begging for his life, knowing what's coming at the hands of the Roman Empire. And he says no. He says no, because there's something bigger taking place here. The redemption of humanity hangs on whether or not Jesus will submissively go to the cross, on whether or not he will surrender to the will of God. And the father, hearing his child cry out, says, no, there's something bigger taking place here. Everything we've worked for since the beginning of humanity hangs on whether or not you fulfill this plan. Generation after generation after generation will find freedom in Jesus. Will find freedom through you if you'll fulfill this. The enormity of the situation is not lost on Jesus. But it is on the disciples. And here's what I want to say to us as followers. I can't tell you how often I am shamed by the fact that the enormity of the situation is lost on me. How often I don't recognize kingdom work sitting right in front of me. How often I choose my will over His. One of the things that I don't know how else to say this. One of the things that I do believe God has given me a little bit of insight into is at least a little bit of discernment in figuring out that every single time I have the opportunity to preach, or every single time I have the opportunity to spend some time with one of you or with anybody I've had in ministry in the past, God has at least reminded me in those moments, this could be a life-changing moment for somebody who's hearing you. And you need to recognize the responsibility of that. Because if you take lightly the preparation for your lessons, or if you take lightly the soul that is in front of you, there's no telling what pain they may encounter or what lack of understanding they may walk away with simply because you did not choose my will. And what I want to say is this. Some of you have children living in your home that need to see you give up your will for God's. Some of us have marriages that need both parties to give up their will for God's. And we are living in a world where situation after situation after situation can be disregarded like, I'll have that opportunity again. Really? Really? And think it doesn't start early in life. I can tell you about one of my best friends who I never shared anything about Jesus with. And he was thrown through the window of a car, and the car rolled over him and killed him. And looking back and going, I missed opportunities. I missed them. Why? Because I was asleep, not recognizing the enormity of the situation. And I think if there's anything we can learn here from this group of disciples, it is that. Open your hearts and your eyes. And did you hear Jesus? He tells them, pray that you will not fall into temptation. And what happens next in the story? Peter denies Jesus. He tells him, you spend some time in conversation with your Lord, in conversation with your God, because temptation is coming. Peter goes to sleep. And the next thing you know, he's saying, I don't know the man. I don't know him. And he deserts his king. Again, I'm not really sure what to do with Jesus struggling in the garden. It bothers me. It really does. Because I like to see my Jesus in control. But I think what bothers me most is when I, like I said, do the reflecting in the mirror and recognize how often I just miss opportunities because I was asleep, not recognizing the gravity of the situation. And in the moment, in each and every moment, yes, our God is gracious. But yes, you can be the vessel of grace in that moment each and every time as well. And I pray God opens our eyes. Mostly because, not because I don't love my job, but it's overwhelming sometimes to hear the destruction of sin in the lives of people. Recognizing, wow, there's a lot of work to be done. It doesn't mean that Christ isn't on the throne, but there's a lot of work to be done. And there are a lot of folks, even another generation coming up behind us, who need to see Christians recognize the gravity of the situation. Kingdom work sitting right in front of us. If there's anything we can do for you, we always offer an invitation. Let's stand and sing.